Yo, it's Guido coming at you with a tactics talk, and we are going to tackle artillery in this talk. We're going to tackle artillery. I got a note from a fairly new subscriber who helped me out, got with his clan, added about a dozen or more probably by the time it was over subscribers, which I really appreciate. And he sent me some nice notes, said thanks for various things, and I did appreciate it. But he also had some things to say about artillery, and I think everyone has heard my we'll call them rants, but fair enough, on artillery. But I'm going to talk about it because he gave me some things to think about here. Things I knew, but never really articulated. And we're going to try to talk about this artillery thing in a fair and balanced way. Fair and balanced. Now, my prejudice is against artillery, so we'll start with that right off the bat. But he makes some really great points. So I'm going to go through his note here to me, and we're going to talk a little bit about it because he kind of touches on all the things that I think are important to the artillery thing in our World of Tanks. So he says, sadly, thanks to the hated 9.18 patch that's so good at artillery, my M44 teammate who played so well in this battle and really used their heads has quit the game. Now this is another example he sent in here, and I don't know if the M44 down there is on his team or what, but you're watching some artillery gameplay from the guy who sent it in. But the point here is really that 9.18, which some say nerfed, some say improved artillery. I sort of land on the side of improved overall, as in it's better for the game and it's better. But most artillery players hated it because it took away the one-shot capability and the real hammer blows that artillery could put in. But what it did is it sped up shooting, made them more accurate, and then, of course, added stun and really nerfed pretty hard the actual damage. Although, the fact is that the damage per game in artillery has not really gone down that much because splash is bigger and you fire more because your reload's lower. It's an interesting thing, but that is just the way it is. Still, you don't have the one-shot capability that you used to have. So he says, over 15,000 players quit the North American server. I don't know where these numbers come from, and I'm not here to challenge numbers necessarily, other than to say that's a bit of a he said, she said thing, unless there's some kind of documentation. What he may be saying is that from that date to now, we have 15,000 less players. To correlate that to only artillery, I don't really believe that, because there's also the argument to be made that artillery has driven away a lot of players as well. So, and that's unfortunate because the game mechanic itself has driven away players both because it's been worked on, I think, to make it better, and because it exists. And so we have a situation where just its existence is causing problems in the game. And I don't think anybody can argue that it's not. You can argue whether it's a problem not worth worrying about or it's a problem that's worth having because it's already good for the game. But you cannot argue that it's been a problem. For whatever your reasoning is, it has definitely been a problem. So he says they gutted artillery, which I don't necessarily agree with. I just talked about that. We'll go on though. It's been the biggest mistake Wargaming ever made, and it has cost them dearly in reduced server populations, reduced revenue, and lost jobs. Again, you know what? I'm gonna say that from looking at it from 30,000 foot, I don't know if that's really true. The game's getting older. Yes, we lost people because of the artillery change. Yes, we've lost a lot of people because artillery's in the game. I think if you're realistic about what's going on, then you have to admit that that is what's happened. By the way, this map that he's playing on is not in the game anymore. Stalingrad, I think. Before 9.18, there were 40 to 45,000 players on the server every night. Look at it now. Okay, granted, there are less. Whether that correlates to Artie, I can't really say. Probably some of it. The offices being closed. Now, correlating Wargaming's offices being closed to artillery being changed in the game, I think is a large stretch. To a large extent, I believe they did that as a money-saving kind of idea. Big companies reorganize a lot. Yes, it probably had something to do with less players on the server. But I've been to the Austin office. It's a big office, and there are a lot of people working there. So it is not a case of they closed it down and there's 3 guys in a shack somewhere in Austin. You know, believe me, they're not planning on closing anytime soon, from what I can see. Will they someday? Sure, more than likely. California Wargaming offices were closed after the hated 9.18 patch and Thane Lyman. Here's the thing though, and we have got to be honest about it. It was hated by some, but a lot of people liked it quite a bit, to be quite honest. I'm very happy not to be deleted at random anymore, unless I happen to be in a light tank, still a problem. But there you have it. So I think there's really two sides to that. Let's see, where does he go on? Removing the AP and heat rounds, reducing alpha damage per shot of one remaining HE round by a whopping 50%. So now artillery cannot defend itself anymore against little light scouting tank, which is, and I'm going to come down fairly hard on that. That just simply is not true. They can absolutely wreck light tanks and do regularly. I do it in my tank. He gets on, later on we talk about shotgunning. And to some extent, he's right. No longer is the 500 hit point heavy going to roll around a corner and get deleted with a shotgun. He's only going to get hit for 150, 250, something like that, and stunned. But believe me, if you're in a light tank and you're low hit point, they are still going to delete you with a shotgun. I do it constantly, and I've had it happen to me constantly. So, yes, you are probably not going to delete that high hit point medium or that medium hit point kind of heavy guy coming after you end game, but you will get your shot in. At the same time, though, you have more opportunity to take shots, which I think is good for the artillery game, where at least they're shooting more and getting more effect, even if the effect is not lots of damage or lots more damage. Although I always have to go back to the fact that the average damage of artillery is roughly the same as it was before. It's just not doing it in the big chunks that it was. At Tier 6, M44 SPG with its 150 millimeter has an average alpha of only 550 with an average penetration of only 39. Think about that. It's a Tier 6 with a 550 alpha. I mean, come on. Holy cow. That's a lot. It really is. You have to be honest. Consider the tier of the tank. Consider the other tanks at that tier. And then, of course, the counter-argument is always, well, they reload slower and the accuracy is less. Exactly. Correct. That's the balance. That's the balance. But when it was one-shotting people like it was, and I'll tell you what, the M44 is still an absolute beast. Best artillery at its tier. An argument for best artillery in the game is the highest, highest income for a tech tree tank is the M44. Because all it has to fire is irregular HE shells, and it does so much damage and is so accurate and fires so often. It's just amazing. It really is. All right, so there's that right there. The M44 only has 36 round ammo rack, whereas and he goes on about the KV2 and the artillery, which I don't really buy that whole thing about, oh, the KV2 is basically the same thing, but it gets all of the big damage and everything. The KV2 has to worry about line of sight. It has to get much closer. It has to worry about both line of sight, draw range. It has to worry about spotting for its, potentially for itself. Other things can spot for it, like the artillery. But you get my drift. The mechanics that a KV2 has to deal with are many more than the artillery. It's just not a very good, in my opinion, not a very good comparison on what's going on. And, view range of artillery, all that kind of good stuff. So he's talking about the battle above. My GW Tiger P only has an average penetration of 44 from a 170 millimeter gun. Yes, those numbers have definitely been changed around. The whole realism thing that the game is loosely based on has been bent quite a bit in order to try to balance artillery out there. But that just had to be done. It absolutely had to be done because artillery was, and still is in my opinion, quite a big problem for the game. Quite a big problem for the game. Now, the other things he talks about, I'm going to pause this gameplay right here for a moment while he's looking at this poor KV3, hopeless guy, right there. Probably the most important thing he talks about, which I agree with, and it's not something I'd thought about too much, is just the fact that so many players are unhappy and they've spent a lot of time and effort in the game. And that one struck a nerve with me because I get it. But what I would like the artillery fans and advocates to remember is that people who don't like artillery have done the same thing in the game with their non-artillery tanks. So there has to be a way to make the two work together better. I would remove it tomorrow and never look back. But it's not realistic, and mostly because of exactly what my friend here said. It's that, look, I spent a lot of time, a lot of players spend a lot of time working on this tank, grinding it, spending money, supporting the game, which supports everyone else that plays the game. So I get it. But there has to be an awareness on the other side that the people who don't like artillery are doing the same thing and supporting the guys playing artillery by supporting the game. So there's definitely both sides to that coin, and everyone likes the game. That's why we're here, and we want it to work together. So I'm going to lay out the biggest, I'm going to call it problem, but the biggest thing that a PvP competitive player does not like about artillery. The number one thing, the base problem, the only problem, really, at the end of the day, is that the artillery unit is unaccountable for most of the game, which means it can do stun and damage, tracking, modules, crew member killing, all that stuff without being threatened. For the majority of the game, minus the very, very infrequent scout that gets through, which doesn't happen really anymore. Used to be a thing, but it's not. Hard, very hard to get through. And even if you do, you're probably coming in low hit points and you're going to get shotgunned, especially early game. Or the occasional counter. So, in order to bring the two sides closer together, what has to happen is something that's going to benefit both of them. Something that's going to benefit both of them and make artillery more of a part of a World of Tanks than playing a separate mini game called Whack-A-Mole. And that is to make artillery more threatened during the early part of the game and to give artillery a little bit more capability while they play. So what does that mean? That means that tracers need to be much more visible. So when artillery fires, there's a chance that they can be countered, a much better chance. And it forces the artillery player to move, it forces them to reposition, forces them to use cover, forces them to think more like you would for the rest of the game, more of the mechanics for the game. Number two, scouts should have some kind of capability to spot the sector artillery fire is coming out of, so that they can then, it will show up basically automatically on the mini-map. It'll light up if a scout's close enough. Now, that needs to be worked a little bit. You could use the standard 500 meter draw range idea just right off the bat and maybe use a little, or you could use the camo idea for the spotting thing. But if you used that, then more than likely the scout would have already spotted the guy. So if you put it out to 500, that means they can roam around the map a little bit, get into decent positions, kind of put eyes on where artillery normally would be, and it would have to be line of sight. I would use line of sight in this case. Vice just letting them get within 500 and automatically know where artillery is firing from. It would have to be line of sight into wherever our artillery is firing from, so that they could get just a little bit outside of their current spotting mechanics. They're able to just light the sector, not light the unit, but light the sector, and give everybody an idea of where the artillery is, which allows your friendly artillery to more effectively counter, find out where they are. It allows your tanks to more effectively understand where the enemy artillery is and use that information to try to protect themselves from it and avoid it if they can. And those two things, better tracers, better counter capability, and scouts being able to give some essay on where artillery is, will then make the competitive PvP player feel a little bit better about artillery being in the game, because there's a way with a good plan and a good player playing artillery, they can counter it, right? Just like your tank can be countered and fired at, the artillery can be countered and fired at during the whole game. During the whole game. So that brings us then to, all right, Guido, fine. But what are you going to do for me? I'm the artillery player. I don't want to just be threatened all the time, and I still don't do anything. That's where now we start to look at artillery, and we decide, okay, you're more threatened, you're more part of the game, you are more involved in some of the mechanics of the game. Now it's time to see if we can't make it more fun for you, where you can actually hit stuff a little bit more. And that's where we start talking about a little bit of accuracy, start talking about maybe a little bit more damage. And really, damage for me with artillery should be brought in line with tank damage. So that tier's damage should be close to what you're doing. Still, the HE mechanics are part of it. I got it. So maybe a bit of a pen buff, maybe a bit of a damage buff. Looking at the tanks to be more or less a at tier damage alpha capability, with the bigger guns being at the top part of alpha damage capability, and obviously the smaller guns faster firing. All those mechanics right there. So it means it might reload faster. It means it may be a little bit more accurate. And then I would adjust maybe stun a little bit, a little less. Potentially, if they're going to fire more, then you probably want a little less stun, because that could become pretty miserable coming in there. And last but not least, what I would do is I would allow splash damage to other artillery units. And this is a little bit out there, but I would like the splash damage to other artillery units to be a little bit more, so that you can more reliably take them out. Because right now, counter artillery is very difficult. You hit them more with your splash, but you kill them less, because you've got to be very close to do enough hit points to take them out on a counter. So there you go. You know, I get it. I understand where the artillery players are coming from, because it's largely where everybody else is coming from. And I know when I say artillery players, us and them, I'm already making a division. We're all playing the same game. And most artillery players play all tanks, and most people who play all tanks play some artillery. So let's be honest about that as well. Everybody, there's very few just arty mains. They're out there. There's just like there's scout mains and TD mains and all that kind of thing. But most people play pretty much everything. But I really believe at the end of the day that what is irritating most people about artillery is just that it's unaccountable. You just get blasted out of the blue, and you really cannot do anything about it. Now, people will counter with, and this is really what drives me crazy, because we get into this big argument, and people will say, well, you're not playing the game right if you're getting hit by artillery. I never get hit by artillery. I never get hit. I know how to minimize. I know how to be arty safe. Well, that's a load of bollocks. It really and truly is a load of bollocks. Just like coming out and saying artillery should be removed tomorrow will make the game much better is probably also a load of bollocks. Even though I've said it, I'll admit it. I would love to give it a try. But just like, hey, if you're getting hit by artillery, you don't know what you're doing, is bollocks. Hey, we should remove artillery tomorrow, that's bollocks. It's all garbage. So how do we then take these two sides and bring them a little bit closer together? Now, a little bit of sibling rivalry is fine. If at the end of the day we're still, you dirty artillery player, you dirty scout player, whatever, that's fun. But let's not make it so acrimonious. Let's try to make the gameplay a little bit better for both sides, so everyone's a little happier. All right, so I really appreciate Steve sending this thing in. Thanks, man. It gave me a lot to think about, and I just wanted to riff a little bit on that. So let's watch what happens here at the end of this battle. This poor KB3 has been stunned, and we're down to 2v1, and he is just attempting to not get killed. And we've got a fan of the G mode. Oh, here it comes. Ouch. And down goes the KB3. Well done, well played. That was a good game, man. I don't see the totals down there. I had to do this off of YouTube because the replay is obviously old. This is a map that's not in the game anymore. But it was 3,000 something damage. Did a really nice job in there with his artillery. As much as I hate to say it. But again, Steve, thanks. I appreciate you sending that. I hope that made sense to most people, especially the artillery fans. And I know I've come down on pretty hard against them. And I've lost subscribers. Just like we described losing players to the game to artillery, I've actually lost subscribers because I've come out against artillery on multiple occasions. And it's very possible I've gained some for the very same thing. So everyone has to be honest. It's a whole picture. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. That is enough of my rambling about artillery. We will see ya.